Live from London, this is BBC News. A judge has blocked President Trump from placing workers at the US International Aid Agency on paid leave hours before it was due to happen. Meanwhile, President Trump says he's immediately revoking Joe Biden's security clearance. Hamas is expected to release 3 more Israeli hostages in the latest exchange of the Gaza ceasefire deal. And the UK government demands access to encrypted data stored by Apple iCloud users worldwide to help tackle crime. Hello, I'm Nicky Schiller. Welcome to the programme. We start this hour in the United States, where a judge in Washington has blocked some of President Trump's plans to dismantle America's international aid organisation. It came after 2 unions sued the Trump administration, which had notified workers that almost all staff at the world's biggest aid donor would be put on leave. Reports suggest that USAID's staff could be slashed from a force of about 10,000 worldwide to just a few hundred. Now, this was the scene on Friday at the organisation's headquarters, where crews were seen removing the signs. The move is part of President Trump's efforts to reshape America's role in foreign aid assistance. But the dismantling of USAID is facing intense criticism at home and abroad. Our North America correspondent Nomi Iqbal has this report.
USAID is the world's largest provider of humanitarian aid. Set up by President Kennedy in 1961, but it's long been criticised, especially by Republicans who claim it's mismanaged. And now President Trump is going further as part of his campaign promise to save public money.
When you look at USAID, that's a fraud. The whole thing is a fraud. Very little being put to good use. Every single line that I look at in terms of events and transactions is either corrupt or ridiculous.
He hasn't offered any evidence of those claims, but today the agency's signs are being removed from its offices. The total USAID budget makes up less than 1% of all US government spending. However, Donald Trump considers many of the projects out of line with his policy agenda. His press secretary listed some of them earlier this week.
$47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru.
Supporters of the agency argue that most of the $40 billion budget goes on food aid and healthcare, vital programs which have now been shut down.
It said, stop it, everything you are doing globally. Right now, stop it, no matter the human consequences.
Regardless if you were in the middle of distributing food.
We have stories of kids who are going in for their TB medicine, and the first 3 kids in a long, long line waiting out in the hot sun got the TB medicine, everybody else told to go home.
The dismantling of USAID is being led by the world's richest man, Elon Musk. President Trump has put him in charge of cutting federal spending, with Musk posting on his X platform that he's working to shut it down. Staff have been protesting. Already shut out of their offices, most of them will be on forced leave from tonight. Some essential programs will be kept on, like funding for the global AIDS response.
We're seeing a lot of disruption of delivery of treatment services, especially at the community level. For example, in Ethiopia, we have 5,000 public health worker contracts that are funded by U.S. assistance, and all of these in all regions of Ethiopia have been terminated.
The Trump administration's moves to gut the agency are raising fears lives may be lost, and that America could also lose its standing on the world stage as rival powers rush to fill the void.
Nomi Iqbal reporting, but let's go live to our North America correspondent Peter Bowes, who is in Los Angeles. Peter, can you just explain what this ruling from the judge means in practical terms?
Well, there's still a lot of uncertainty over what this ruling really means, because the judge in this really, it seems, short-term order has given a reprieve to just over 2,000 of USAID's workers. So there is really no mention of the others. And we know that this is an organisation that employs about 10,000 people around the world. About two-thirds of those are indeed overseas. And those are people who'd been told that they will be expected to return to the United States within within a month. So the judge's ruling offers a reprieve to those few. The others, in terms of what's going to happen to them, that seems uncertain at the moment. But the judge has also said for those that are put on unpaid leave, they must be retained. In other words, they can't be sacked. They can't lose their jobs for a period of 1 week until February the 14th. So this is very short term in terms of this injunction. No doubt, as the court continues to look at the arguments put forward by these two unions, arguing that this organisation, that this agency should be saved.
Yeah, on the arguments, the lawsuit does argue that President Trump's plans violated the US Constitution, arguing only Congress can dismantle the organisation. So are we likely to get more legal arguments and indeed more legal cases?
Yeah, I think we're very likely to get that. I think other organisations could come forward with legal cases as well, putting pressure on the government. And as you know, the legal process in this country can sometimes move quite slowly. And if it isn't settled in one court, it can go to a higher court. So I think this could well turn into a battle between the Trump administration and the courts. And it's interesting, that argument about Congress and the Constitution, the argument being that the funding initially was agreed by Congress, and that at least as far as the unions and their lawyers, is that means that Congress is the only entity that can legally decide the future of this organisation, and it isn't necessarily, they argue, within the power of the president.
And meanwhile, Peter, what about the work that USAID does around the world? How much of that has been put on hold or halted?
A lot of it has been put on hold. We've heard from organisations that are obviously working in association with the staff that are still here in the United States, but the many American staff overseas, that they've simply had to put those programmes on hold. And these are programmes that are primarily focused on humanitarian aid, on health projects, preventing diseases from spreading, perhaps preventing another virus that could lead to a global pandemic. So these are serious-minded organisations in some of the world's poorest regions, some of the world's poorest countries, who have had to, because of the uncertainty, simply for now put everything on hold, not knowing whether they're going to be cancelled altogether.
Peter, live in Los Angeles, thank you. Well, meanwhile, President Trump says he is immediately revoking his predecessor's security clearance, a move that ends Joe Biden's access to daily classified intelligence briefings. He posted that Mr. Biden could not be trusted because of alleged problems with his memory, in a reference to the catchphrase of his former reality TV show, The Apprentice. Mr. Trump said, "Joe, you're fired." Former US presidents traditionally access intelligence briefings, though Mr. Biden rescinded Mr. Trump's after his first term ended. It is, of course, the third week of Donald Trump's second term, and it's been marked by more major action from the US president and his team, from announcing those US goals on the future of Gaza to banning transgender women from female sports competitions. Mr. Trump, Elon Musk and the rest of his team have pressed on with their agenda. So let's talk more about that with Daniel Lippman, who is White House reporter at Politico. He joins us from Washington. Let's start with President Biden revoking Joe Biden's security clearance. That not a surprise?
Not a huge one. I don't think Joe Biden was spending hours every day poring over these intelligence reports because, he can read the New York Times or Politico to find out what's going on in the world. And especially since he's no longer president, you don't want the burden of hearing about classified information when you can't actually do anything about it. And so the former president's team is not responding. And of course, privately, they would be talking about how President Biden was never accused of bringing lots of classified documents in many boxes. Only a few documents they took. They were not charged with the crimes like President Trump was down in Mar-a-Lago a couple of years ago.
Now, I've looked on the BBC News website. It's got an article listing 16 things that President Trump and the team have done this week, imposing those tariffs on China, sanctioning the International Criminal Court, withdrawing from UN institutions. There's banning the transgender competitors from women's sports, releasing water from dams in California, intervened in a dispute in the Gulf world, increased access for Elon Musk's Doge Group. Are you surprised at how fast things are going?
I think we all are, that this is almost like a shock and awe. This is like the US invading Iraq in 2003. In terms of, he is really trying to expand the use of executive power. It's almost called the unitary executive theory in terms of how Congress is defanged right now. The Republicans have been cowed. They don't want to be subject to primary challenges by Trump or by Elon Musk. And what's funny about how Elon Musk is playing a big role here as well is that Musk is getting the criticism. He's getting the brunt of the protests because he is the one who is doing cuts to USAID. He is getting access to treasury payment systems. And so he's almost like Trump is the good cop, Elon Musk is the bad cop. And that's good news for Trump because then he is not as much the villain anymore. And so I think that may be a little bit of an intentional move by him.
And how are the Democrats responding to all of this?
They are still scrambling. And so they're still licking their wounds and trying to figure out a message going forward. And so they feel like one congressman said that Elon Musk was a good villain for them to have. But what they're talking about is, hey, why are you spending all of this time on sometimes symbolic actions like rescinding Joe Biden's security clearance? How is that going to lower the price of eggs in Des Moines, Iowa? And how is reducing the USAID budget when that's a very small fraction of the federal budget? That doesn't really address the $36 trillion in federal debt. Or help with inflation. And so that's kind of, they're really going to hit on the economic message.
Daniel Lippman, White House reporter at Politico, thank you as always for joining us.
Good.
To the Middle East now, and 3 more Israeli hostages are expected to be released by Hamas later after 490 days being held in Gaza. They are 34-year-old Or Levy, who was captured at the Nova Music Festival, and Eli Sharabi, who's 52, and Ohad Ben Ami, who is 56, both taken from Kibbutz Be'eri. So far, 18 hostages have been freed since the ceasefire in Gaza began nearly 3 weeks ago. Later, more than 180 Palestinian prisoners are due to be freed by Israel in return. Mr. Levy's brother Michael gave his reaction to the news that he will be released.
Wow, it's, I can't even start to describe the emotions, the excitement, how happy we are that it's finally close to be over. And yeah, now we are waiting to hug him, waiting to see Almog hugging his father again. We knew it might happen in the next few weeks. We didn't expect it to be tomorrow, but yeah, we're happy. We're happy it finally happened. It was a nightmare. It's as simple as that. 490 days of worst 490 days of my life. I guess I always knew here that he will be okay and he'll come back alive, and this was the reason for this fight.
Well, our correspondent Wera Davis is in Jerusalem and sent us this update.
Well, we've now finally had the list of the next 3 hostages to be released under phase 1 of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. So by the end of the weekend, a total of 21 hostages will have been released in exchange for more than 500 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Much more aid is getting into Gaza, of course, and there's been a partial reopening of the border between Egypt and Gaza through the Rafah crossing. So there's tangible benefits from this ongoing ceasefire deal, even though it's been coming under a lot of pressure, particularly from those who want the war against Hamas to restart. The next 3 hostages to be released are all men. They're Eli Sharabi, Or Levy and Ohad Ben Ami. Now, they are all men, 2 of them from kibbutz. One of them was abducted from the music festival where more than 300 people were killed on October the 7th. This is, of course, very good news for their families. There will be bittersweet moments because many of those being released have also lost families and friends. They were killed on October the 7th when Hamas gunmen stormed across the border and more than 1,200 people were killed. Since then, more than 47,000 people are reported to have been killed in Gaza as well. There's a lot of support on both sides of the fence here, in Israel and in Palestinian circles, for this ceasefire to be continued into a second phase, but that is by no means a certainty.
Wera Davis, well, let me take you live to the scene in Gaza City, where in the last few minutes or so we have seen, as you can see, a number of what we believe to be Hamas fighters there arriving. There is also a podium stage that has been set up, and you'll know in previous hostage exchanges, the hostages are brought along, then they're put on the stage before they are handed over to the International Committee of the Red Cross. So 7:15 in the morning in Gaza City. I can also show you some pictures from Hostages Square, which is in Tel Aviv. This is where regularly the family and friends of those who've been held hostage gather, and what normally happens when we have these hostage exchanges is that people will gather there to watch the live pictures from Gaza. Joining me is Mohammed Taha from BBC Arabic. So Mohammed, what are we expecting to happen today?
So we're expecting to see the release of the 3 Israeli hostages from the area of Deir el-Balah in the middle of Gaza. There are preparations underway at the moment. The stage is being put. I believe this would happen in the coming between 2 to 3 hours. Afterwards, the Israeli forces or the Israeli authorities will release 183 Palestinians to the Palestinian side. Most of these prisoners were held during the war in Gaza, 111 of them, and others were already condemned of attacking Israeli targets before. So today is the day of the exchange of hostages and prisoners.
And where are we on the talks on phase 2 of the ceasefire? Because the current releases are part of phase 1, but those phase 2 talks were supposed to be underway by now.
Of course. So today is the release. Tomorrow is the day 22 of the deal. Expected that Israel will dismantle completely the Netzarim corridor, which is separating the south from the north. And Israel will be only on the borders of Gaza. They will be allowed only 750 meters into Gaza, and in 5 areas 1,200 meters into Gaza. Monday is expected the second phase talks to start. That the second phase should start after 3 weeks. So these talks should start on Monday, and Tuesday President Trump will meet King Abdullah in the White House. So it's a full week of negotiations and actions regarding this ceasefire deal that is supposed to go into its second phase in 3 weeks.
Okay, Mohammed, thank you for the very latest at the moment. We will, of course, go back to Gaza City as and when we see that hostage release happening. Now here, the families of 3 people who were killed by a paranoid schizophrenic in Nottingham in 2023 say they will meet the Prime Minister next week to call for a statutory public inquiry into what happened. A review into the care of Valdo Calacane received from the NHS prior to the attacks concluded that there had been a catalogue of failings. Our correspondent Simon Jones has more.
It's more than 18 months since Ian Coates, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar were stabbed to death. But their families say they are still fighting for answers. This is the moment Valdo Calacane, a paranoid schizophrenic, was arrested. He was sentenced to an indefinite hospital order for manslaughter. An independent review of his care prior to the attacks, published on Wednesday, found his risk was not fully understood or managed.
Good morning, everybody. Once again, thanks for your attendance.
Relatives of his victims told a news conference that the authorities, who they say failed their loved ones, still need to be held to account.
To the Prime Minister and the rest of the government, make this trauma stop and make our fight stop now. You have confirmed there'll be a public inquiry, but agree the terms that we've been pleading for. Make it statutory. All of the agencies, organisations, institutions and vitally individuals must then and will be compelled to attend, give evidence and tell the truth.
Acknowledging just from...
The families met Sir Keir Starmer when he was leader of the opposition last year. They will meet him again, this time as Prime Minister, on Wednesday. The government says work is ongoing to establish the precise scope of the inquiry it has promised. The families insist it must examine the role of the police and the CPS, as well as doctors. The NHS review revealed before the attacks, Callacane had been sectioned 4 times in less than 2 years. But there had been no contact between him and health staff for about 9 months prior to the killings. He wasn't forced to take antipsychotic medication, in part because he didn't like needles. And the concerns of Callacane's own family were not properly acted upon. The trust which treated him has apologised and says it has already made significant changes in its mental health care. As they prepare to head to Downing Street again, the families of Callacane's victims say the findings have left them feeling horrified and heartbroken, but more determined than ever in memory of their loved ones that the government should react. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Now, the UK government is demanding that data from our phones and laptops, which ends up being stored in what's known as the cloud, the virtual internet, should be made accessible to security services in order to tackle crime, including terrorism and child exploitation. The move focuses on Apple's encrypted iCloud service, which at the moment only the account holder can access. Well, let's get more on this with our North America technology correspondent Lily Jamali, who is in San Francisco for us. So, Lily, just explain, what data does the UK want to access and why?
Yeah, this is information that is part of a service that Apple has been offering since 2022. It's called Advanced Data Protection. Users opt into it. They have to take a couple of steps to get it, make it available to them on their devices. And it applies to, everything you would expect, photos and notes and emails and all of that. It's so secure, in fact, that material, if for people who opt into this program, it's only the user who can access that stuff. The company itself, Apple, cannot access this material, and that is by design. It is encrypted. Now we're seeing, according to reporting from the Washington Post and now confirmed by the BBC, that the UK wants access to that information, to that media, for national security purposes. The thinking here is it will help law enforcement officials with investigations into criminal activity, investigations into terrorism, as well as child sexual abuse. The issue here for privacy advocates is that this appears to be a very wide-ranging demand, blanket access to this type of material, not just for Apple users in the UK, but for Apple users all around the world. So that's why we're seeing so much pushback to this from the advocacy community.
And have Apple said anything?
Apple is not commenting at this time, and we should note that this demand, according to our reporting in the Washington Post, is coming through the Home Office in the UK. They also are not commenting at this time.
And I assume, as you've mentioned, there could be implications worldwide if other governments around the world demand the same access, not just from Apple, but maybe other technology firms who operate cloud data storage.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, there is this ongoing debate between privacy advocates and people who say, look, for national security issues and criminal investigations, this material is really important. And that's a debate that's playing out, obviously, not just in the United Kingdom, but here in the United States. I think back to 2015, when there was a mass shooting here in California, when the FBI went to Apple and asked for the company to jailbreak the phone of a suspect that was involved in that shooting. Apple said no. That story was widely reported and picked up all around the world. Consumers saw it. And I think that it's really important to a company like Apple to market itself in a particular way, to market itself as a privacy centric company. And consumers have gotten the message. So I think capitulating to a request like this, whether it's in the UK or someplace else, is bad for the Apple brand. That's how I think they view it. And so I think we're going to see a lot of pushback.
Lily Jamali live in San Francisco. Thank you. Now, a 300-year-old Stradivarius violin has fetched $11.3 million at auction in New York. It's said to be one of the most expensive musical instruments ever sold, though it fell short of its estimate. Sotheby's auctioneers said the proceeds from the violin sale will go to establish a scholarship in support of future generations of musicians at the New England Conservatory. It was purchased by an anonymous buyer. I just want to take you back to those live pictures that we're getting from Gaza City. Hamas is due to release 3 Israeli hostages in return for 183 Palestinian prisoners in the 5th exchange of the Gaza ceasefire deal. You can see that cars are lined up there along with Hamas fighters. Stay with us for the latest here on BBC News.